view it later, people who aren't able to come tonight. So be aware of that recording happening. So brief overview of the agenda tonight. And before even we go through the agenda, I want to just point out this link at the bottom left of the screen, tinyurl.com/planhampton. That will take you to the project website. If you want to find the draft products that we're going to be talking about tonight, that's where you can find them. And if you want them in front of you while we're giving this presentation, you can go find that now and download those. So we invite you to do that. So we'll start off talking about the vision, and we'll have a presentation. As I said, you'll all be muted and have your camera off, but we'll have some polls for you to participate. And also you can use the chat box to talk. And then after we have gone through the overview of the vision, we'll have time for an open discussion about it. Once we're done talking about the vision, we'll move on for the second half of the meeting to talk about the coastal resilience chapter that we have been producing as part of this project. And same thing, we'll have polls and a chat for you to participate, and then an open discussion after that. And then at the end, we can have, depending on time, we can have a more open discussion. So if we don't get to everything in the vision, but you want to go back to that at the end, then that's fine. So I'm gonna hand it off for a minute to Jason to give us a little context for what this project is about.
Great. Thank you very much, Noah. I'm Jason Bichond. I'm Hampton's town planner, and I'm just going to give a bit of context, as Noah noted, about the bigger picture of our overall master plan process. So the last comprehensive update of the Town of Hampton master plan occurred back in 1985. There's been some chapter updates since that time. So this is a process that's long overdue for us. The planning board, who is responsible for the master plan, initiated the current process and established a steering committee consisting of the full planning board, members of the town, of other town boards and committees, and resident representatives to guide the development of the master plan update. This first phase involves the development of the vision and coastal content of the master plan, and those draft documents will be discussed and presented this evening. There is a second phase to the comprehensive master plan update, which incorporates the phase one work while developing content for numerous additional master plan components. Those include, but are not limited to, land use, transportation, recreation, economic development, and cultural historical resources. The firm Resilience Planning and Design was selected by the planning board to complete the second phase of the project. That will officially kick off during the March 17th planning board and steering committee meeting. There'll be discussions and kickoff at that time on that phase. At the end of phase two in our overall planning process, which is expected around December of 2022, and following adoption of the plan by the planning board, we will have a fully updated comprehensive map for the entire town of Hampton. This will be an innovative, integrated, and user-friendly document, which will be utilized regularly for amendments to local regulations, pursuing grant funding, special town projects, and much more. The plan may be best described as the instructional for long-range development over the next 10, 20 years. And public participation is an essential part of this process. And through events such as evening, we need your thoughts about how to help shape Hampton's future. I will turn it over to Noah, who's leading this evening's program.
Thanks, Jason. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. All right, so Jason already gave an overview of what a master plan is a little bit there, but basically the purpose of the master plan is to establish a shared vision for the community and to guide future actions and decisions. The kind of master plan of the master plan vision is a set of statements that documents the big picture desires of the citizens affected by the master plan, and it includes a set of guiding principles and priorities to implement that vision. So the vision document that we've prepared during this first phase consists of an introduction, giving a little overview of Hampton and some information about how to use the vision and how the vision was created. the guiding principles and priorities that really form the backbone of the vision, and then a more succinct vision statement that summarizes all of the guiding principles and priorities. What I want to talk about tonight specifically will be these guiding principles and priorities. So these are the 6 different priorities that we've identified and developed for the vision. I'll talk through each of them in the coming slides. In terms of getting feedback from you about these priorities, what we're going to do, again, as I've said, we'll have some polls and we'll have the chat. I encourage you to use the chat during, as we're going through the slides, and ask your questions or make comments. We'll wait on more kind of in-depth discussion until I've finished presenting about this, and then we'll have the open discussion and we can address those questions there. But Victoria is going to be monitoring the chat, and if she sees questions that are kind of clarifying questions, then we can try to address those as we go. The other thing that we're going to do is have a poll which asks a pretty simple, rate how much you like each of these priorities as we go through, and that's just going to stay up there. So you're not going to have to be on a timeline to kind of respond to each one as we go through. So Victoria, if you want to launch that poll now. Actually, as I say this, I'm changing my mind. So maybe end the poll. Sorry, Victoria, because I'm realizing that it works if you're on a desktop, but for some of you who are on phones or iPads, it might just get stuck and block everything. So as we go through, think about try to keep track of each priority and what you think about it, and we'll have the poll towards the end. All right, moving on. Sorry about that. All right, so starting with this first priority, preserving a sense of place and identity. This came from public input that was really thinking about how Hampton should grow in the future and bring a new population and grow its existing population in the future and develop. But also preserve landscapes, architecture, the town's unique beauty, identity, and community, with a big focus on maintaining the sense of kind of small town community and identity as a New England coastal town. So some of the different aspects of this this priority include supporting community organizations and municipal services, building relationships between residents that last even as maybe there are more residents in the future, and introducing and growing a diverse population in Hampton, supporting a robust fishing and boating industry as part of the identity of Hampton and its historic identity, preserving water access and making sure that residents of Hampton are able to use the coastal waters that are such an important part of the community. Zoning in ways that can help support the unique characteristics of some of the different neighborhoods in Hampton. And similarly, thinking about architectural and landscaping styles, and making sure that those are consistent within different neighborhoods, and then preservation of historic structures and views. And as I go through this, I just want to kind of make clear that these aren't necessarily new ideas. I think some of them are, but these are things that are identified as priorities, and some of them Hampton already does. So if you're seeing something and you're saying, "Hey, Hampton does that," yes, we know, and we want to keep going with that in the future. This next one, forward-looking development. This is making sure that future development in Hampton considers future conditions in Hampton and in the world, with a big focus on climate change and coastal resilience and the types of coastal changes that might affect how development is able to be sustainable in the future. So facilitating growth within Hampton, but also migration from risk areas, and migration from risk areas within Hampton so that Hampton doesn't lose population if, for example, some coastal areas become more challenging to reside in. And then also preserving open space in low density areas while increasing density and growth in some other areas. So some of these, this priority includes limiting development in hazard zones, incentivizing retrofits for buildings to build resiliency, protecting critical facilities and infrastructure, redirecting development to inland locations. So think about where development happens, or more dense development. Increasing residential density, for example, near the town center, preserving existing open spaces, and enabling retreat from coastal or hazard areas when desired by property owners and when appropriate. So a robust and resilient economy. We heard a lot about the strength of Hampton's local business economy, and we want to make sure that in the future, Hampton continues to have a strong economy, and also a economy that is robust year-round and diverse, and has a diverse workforce as well as the economy itself. So some aspects of this include economic diversity, thinking about making sure that Hampton has a variety of different economic drivers within town, supporting local businesses, supporting water dependent uses and water access and businesses that depend on water access. Developing businesses outside of hazard zones. The coastal Hampton Beach area is a very important economic driver for the town. That's great, and also important to develop outside of hazard zones in case a coastal hazard were to impact that economic area. Some of these we'll end up talking more about in the coastal resilience part of tonight. Thinking about, again, with coastal resilience, thinking about business resilience to coastal hazards and generally to other disruptions. We've seen that this year for sure with COVID-19 and making sure that businesses can be resilient. So thinking about that, and then making sure that the economy is robust year round, and in addition to the summer vacation season. Open space and natural resources are a priority. Proactively protecting natural areas for recreation purposes, to draw tourists, to support the environment, and also for their hazard mitigation benefits. So aspects of this priority include supporting the Parks and Recreation Department, which pretty much across the board we heard great things about through our public input. Preserving existing natural areas, and also considering climate change, sea level rise, and groundwater rise when thinking about what natural areas are going to look like in the future. Minimizing stormwater pollution to natural habitats, making sure that open spaces are accessible so that all residents of Hampton are able to use them and enjoy them. Supporting the Seacoast Greenway, the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway construction, which, if you can kind of tell the background of this picture, is the current Seacoast Greenway through Hampton Center. So developing that potentially great asset for the town. Thinking about the ability of open spaces to support marsh migration and to mitigate hazards in flood zones, and then implementing green infrastructure and living shorelines as part of a kind of comprehensive natural resource plan. Connected community. We heard a fair amount about kind of Hampton Beach versus Hampton not beach, the inland Hampton or the town center. And there's a lot of interest in making sure that Hampton becomes connected, both in terms of practically connected, and also in terms of kind of community identity. So this priority really focuses on the practical sense of connecting different parts of the community. So thinking about multimodal transit, such as bike paths, sidewalks, potentially a public transit system. There's questions about how to implement these things, but at this point in the vision, the idea is just to pursue it and think about it. And other infrastructure upgrades to connect the community from the west side of Hampton, town center, east to Hampton Beach and the other beaches. So connecting those different things, and then also thinking about traffic reduction and pedestrian safety and walkability and things like that. And then the final priority that we have is this regional voice. You know, Hampton is really well positioned within New Hampshire and the Seacoast region. There are a lot of federal and state and regional organizations and institutions that operate out of Hampton or that do research in Hampton through the university, and so on. And there's a lot of opportunity for Hampton to kind of, you know, benefit from those different resources kind of feeding down into Hampton, but also to kind of push back up that system and make sure that Hampton can be a regional voice. One example off the top of my head is the recent Hampton Beach Area Commission Coastal Resilience Symposium that brought people from across the state and the region and maybe the country to talk about coastal resilience in Hampton, and really be a voice on a larger scale. So thinking about how Hampton can be a regional voice is the last one. So those are our, I think that was 6 different priorities. So now we can open it up to discussion a little bit. I'm actually going to go back to the first slide so that we can have an overview of all of those. And Victoria, do you want to now put up the poll so people can kind of give us a sense of how they feel about each of these? This is, you know, a pretty simple poll, you know, just on a scale of 1 to 4, basically, how much do you like each of these different priorities and principles. And if you can access the chat, we encourage you to chat about anything that you might want to ask. And then I'm going to change the permissions so people can raise their hand if you want to say anything or share anything or ask a question. So we'll give people a minute to try that out. And Dave and Victoria, I'm just gonna make everyone able to unmute themselves. So if you, or actually I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna allow people to start their videos. Sorry. So if people can turn on their video, if you can't find the raise hand, you can raise your hand in person so we can see you and we'll allow you to talk. And I guess Dave and Victoria, keep an eye out for anybody being problematic. Okay, any questions or comments? Or anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
Oh, I see. Catherine, are you trying to ask something? Oh, okay, great. Sorry. I'm clicking the ask to unmute, so you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Noah. You did a really great job. From your perspective, do you have examples of towns? Like a lot of your ideas, they're really great. I just don't, I guess I ask how, you know, resilient and robust economy, how to leverage our regional voice, how. Do you have similar towns, like similar to Hampton, that you can be, of course we can't copy, we're all unique, but it's always nice to see similar town sizes, locations, levels of development, and what they've done right and what they haven't done right. That's really good to help envision your vision.
Yeah, that's interesting. Good question. So, you know, we looked at other communities in New Hampshire and outside of New Hampshire. I think we looked at Norfolk, Virginia as an example of another kind of coastal community that really is closely tied to the coast, and looked at their vision. You know, I think for the vision level, this is phase 1 to kind of guide the development of the rest of the master plan, which the rest of the master plan really answers those how questions. This was really us looking at public input that we got through a public survey and a few other sources, a survey that had gone up before the project started, and other past reports that had been done for Hampton to kind of see what people are interested in and what directions they want to go. So, it might not be a totally satisfactory answer, but that's really, I think, phase 2 is okay, now how do we go about achieving these things?
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Barbara, I see that your camera is also on. Did you want to say something or have a question? I can't really see you though.
Not at this point.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, not seeing anything in the chat or anything here. Oh, sorry. Somebody unmuted themselves. I mean, turned on their camera. I'll ask you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, beautiful. Just a quick one. I've looked at several of these studies now, and I see this little creek behind me called Eel Creek and sometimes called Tide Mill Creek. And I'm pretty sure there is a Tide Mill Creek, and this isn't it. I've got a study that was done by the Department of Agriculture, and they call it Eel Creek. But I've also seen a couple of maps. So which is it? And how do we get the map straightened out so that everybody's talking about the same thing?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I know Eel Creek. I'm not sure what the appropriate name is. Many of these water bodies have multiple names, and I think Eel Creek is actually a dug ditch that's part of a larger creek, so it could be both. But yeah, I think, having accurate mapping is an important aspect to coastal resiliency and so on. We can get more into that in the second part of the meeting tonight, where we talk specifically about the coastal resilience plan, where I think that might be more relevant.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I can also think about, how to incorporate improved mapping and things like that into this vision. That might fall under the regional voice thing, making sure that the different state and federal institutions that do this mapping are all on the same page.
Excuse me, even in the master plan, the Mill Creek is used. And in one place it talks about Mill Creek on Winnicott Ave. And I know that I think they're talking about Eel Creek on Winnicott Ave because, the Mill Creek is on the next street up. What is it? High Street?
Is that from the previous version or from the drafts that were online for this? Do you know?
I was looking through the draft.
Okay. So I'll look into that. So Tide Mill Creek versus Eel Creek.
Versus, yeah. Because I can see Eel Creek as being very important when we get to the flood mitigation and draining the areas that are flooding up there in Meadow Pond. And so we ought to be talking about the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll double check and make sure that those are all correctly named.
Yeah, you'll see a couple of them around page 21.
Okay.
A couple of references to check. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Tony, did you want to say something?
There you go.
Yeah, just quickly, if that's okay. Thank you. So I guess we're talking about the guiding principles and priorities right now, just that one page. I understand these are meant to be brief because it's just the, vision statement chapter. And I don't see anything, maybe we simplified it about talking about Hampton as a town, but I haven't seen much or any mention of Hampton Beach and what Hampton Beach contributes to the town. Is that purposefully or purposeful?
It's not purposeful. We're trying to get a kind of single vision statement for the entire community, including Hampton Beach.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I can go over it
Maybe-
again and
yeah.
kind of see where there are opportunities to make sure that Hampton Beach is,
Yeah, because a lot of people work, at the beach, the high school kids, the business owners. There's a lot of connection,
yeah,
with Hampton Beach. We all know half of it's state and half of it's town. So it just maybe, yeah, if you could look for opportunity to include Hampton Beach.
sure, yeah. I mean, I'll say that, consideration of Hampton Beach was definitely part of the development. So we were thinking about it, but if maybe we just didn't work it in there explicitly, which is, we'll make sure to change.
Yeah. Because I mean, I think there is a somewhat of I don't know what term I'm trying to use, but lack of they're right. It seems like right now they're separate. There's Hampton Beach HBAC, and then there's Town Hall, and I guess looking forward in the future, it'd be good to see it, more coordination, connection. Just my thought. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna, if other people have anything to say, feel free to raise your hand or turn your camera on so I can see you and I'll know that you want to say something. In the meantime, I'm going to end this poll and hold on to those results. And then Victoria, can you share the next one? Yeah, so just sorry. So one quick poll kind of overarching for the master plan vision about these guiding principles and priorities. If you can see that and just respond to that, that would be great. So we'll give people a minute or two to do that, and and a minute or two for people to figure out if anybody else has a question or comment, and then we'll shift gears to talk more about the coastal resilience plan. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat or anyone else seeming to want to say anything. Oh, yeah, Tony. Great. Oh, sorry. Let me make sure you can unmute again.
Yeah, just another comment. I definitely think it's, looks good, but better. There's more in it. The conservation part of it, and the Conservation Commission and the efforts they do, I think maybe the section in open space. What section is that? So we're commenting on all these sections, right? So open space and natural resources.
Yeah, so
I think,
fourth one.
Including the, Conservation Commission efforts somewhere in that, because, they do so much with all the different, White's Lane, Hampton Woods, Batchelder Pond, all our open spaces, or is it, and the Hampton Commission is kind of central to all that. So, maybe including them there. Yeah.
Sure,
You know,
yeah.
I know it's kind of obvious, like the planning board is very central to planning and development, I kind of, but somehow with relation to all the open spaces that Hampton has to offer, who's maybe in charge of that, or, responsible, something like that.
Yeah.
Just other comment I wrote down. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I've have heard great things about the Conservation Commission, so
Thanks. Thank you.
Noah,
yeah.
hi, Brian Warburton here. How are you?
Hey, Brian. Good. How are you?
Yeah, I want to piggyback on Tony's great comment. It's funny. I was just thinking the same thing in the Conservation Commission, because one of the premier responsibilities that has been so guided, not only on developments, but actually in town meetings and approval by voters, has been the preservation of open space. And I think somewhere in these documents, we should include that the Conservation Commission somehow, and we don't have to word it tonight, will continue to play a major role, because, you look at things like, Tony mentioned White's Lane, but you even go to the Herd Farm back in the early 2000s, the Batchelor property. Of course, Batchelor Pond is in areas owned by the school district, but there's just so many other areas that the Conservation Commission continuously looks at preserving open space. So that's going to be a critical component, because that's going to really follow through a lot of the other endeavors we want to be involved with, whether it's recreation or other parts of the vision overall. And so that's an excellent point. I was thinking of that as you're saying that. I said, somehow we have to just identify, because we've done a lot of great work now, but we want the public to know in the future master plan that they will continue to be an integral part of, what we do going forward.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
If I could, there's one quick comment. I notice in a lot of the planning documents that we talk about, the next 10 years, the next 25 years, the next 50 years, but the next 10 years begins tomorrow. And there are some things that need to be done so that we're ready to do the things that we're planning to do. Particularly, I'm talking about Eel Creek and the erosion problems they have. If we do much more planning, we're not going to have a lot to preserve there. We're losing the marsh very, very quickly. We're developing a lot of good mudflats. But you understand, I'm not trying to be funny. I mean, it's something that's happening now. And sometimes when we're doing forward planning, we forget that the planning starts with what's left of what it is we're trying to preserve, unless we start now.
Yep. It's a good point. And I think a good, I'm going to use it also to transition to the next part of our talk tonight about coastal resilience. And start off just by saying that one aspect of the coastal resilience chapter, which you all haven't been able to see yet because it hasn't been completed, is taking all of the actions, the recommendations, and putting timelines on them. So there'll be some short-term, medium-term, long-term recommendations there. So it's a great point. All right, so we're gonna move on now to the coastal resilience. Okay, let's see if I can do this without having to go through every slide. Perfect. Okay, everyone sees coastal resilience?
Yes.
All right, and everyone's back muted. Okay, so the coastal resilience plan is the other aspect of what we've been working on over the last series of months during this first phase of the plan. So this is designed as one chapter or section of the overall master plan. Generally, it includes an overview of the different hazards that threaten the Hampton coast, such as sea level rise and flooding, an analysis of areas that are vulnerable to those hazards, and a list of strategies and recommendations to increase the community's resilience. Today, I'm hoping to focus mostly on those recommendations. We've had other public workshops and focus groups where we've been able to talk a little bit more about the vulnerabilities and the hazards. So I'm going to focus now on the recommendations. But if you have questions or want to ask more about the hazards or the vulnerabilities, let me know and we can try to address that as well. So I'm going to give a kind of brief overview before we get into the recommendations. So we define coastal resilience as the capacity of a coastal community to sustain achievement of community goals and social, economic, and environmental well-being over the long term in a changing climate. So there's a lot in there, but we're thinking about all different aspects of the community, the social, economic, and environmental well-being, in addition to the kind of resilience of the built environment over the long term in the face of a changing climate. And we're looking not just to have a community that's able to bounce back from a disaster that strikes, but actually to kind of leap forward and come back better and stronger than it was before the disaster hit. We look at the New Hampshire state guidance about what the projected changes are in the future due to climate change. I'm not going to go through any of these in detail right now, but thinking about sea level rise, 1.3 to 2.3 feet by 2050, and much significantly more than that, or a wider range than that in the future, like to 2100. Increasing frequency and intensity of coastal storms, groundwater rise that will impact areas more than 3 miles inland, and precipitation, increasing both the overall precipitation, but more significantly the impact of severe events. So there are expected to be a significant increase in the number of severe precipitation events happening every year. So in other words, kind of higher sea levels, higher groundwater levels, more storms, more severe storms, and more rainfall are the different things that we're concerned about and trying to plan for. As I said, we're thinking about the kind of whole community. So that includes the built environment, including buildings, homes, critical facilities, roadways, and other infrastructure and utilities. Hampton's economy is vulnerable to coastal hazards, the tax base that these different buildings form, as well as businesses and tourism and people wanting to come spend time at Hampton Beach, for example. Society and culture, who are the vulnerable populations? Marginalized populations tend to be more impacted by natural disasters, including coastal hazards. So think about that. And then what are the cultural resources or historic resources that are at risk from coastal hazards? And then natural systems, the different wetlands, beaches, open space throughout town, and freshwater resources such as groundwater. So thinking about the whole community and how those are all impacted by coastal change. And then to build coastal resilience, we have these kind of five overarching strategies. And the different strategies, it's not that one is better than the other. It's that to build resilience, we need to use a palette of all of these different strategies and think about where we applied each one and how we make it appropriate to that area. So some areas we're going to try to protect from flooding and prevent flooding from impacting it at all. Other areas we're going to accommodate, elevate or flood-proof buildings so that flooding can occur without causing damage to buildings. Other things include changing behaviors so that people aren't as impacted by flooding, avoiding new development in areas at risk now and areas at risk in the future, In some cases, facilitating relocation of people and populations away from hazard zones is going to be part of the strategies. And in some places, there might be nothing to do. It might be that the risk to an area is such that it makes sense to just kind of let it be and let nature take its course as it will. So we're trying to incorporate all of these different approaches or all of these different approaches into the Resilient Hampton strategies that we identified. So if you had a chance to look at the plan, you'll see that there are these 11 overarching strategies, and then within each strategy is a series of more specific recommendations. Each of these strategies is intended to guide future planning and decision making. And while the specific actions that we identified, they may change in the future as things in the community change or as sea level rise changes and so on. But these strategies we think are kind of like the key backbone to making future decisions. So I'm going to try to go through relatively quickly all of these and the different recommendations. I'm going to start off just looking at the strategies so that I can hopefully kind of show you how they're connected a little bit, and then we'll move on to the recommendations that each has. So thinking about how Hampton is laid out, there's a coastal area that has high risk and is also an important economic driver, and it draws a lot of tourism and a lot of people live there. So thinking about focusing development and investment in low risk areas so that we have a strong kind of economic base and population base outside of the risk areas in the future as sea level rise and climate change kind of puts strain on those coastal areas. Within those areas, though, the coastal areas, we do want to protect using that kind of more aggressive approach of protecting some sections that we're calling resilient hubs and connectors. So kind of really targeting where we're using protection. Other areas will apply the living with the water approach, accommodation, making sure that damage is minimized and that people are able to continue living even as flooding worsens over time. A part of that is going to be addressing drainage systems. That also applies to resilient hubs and connectors, but it's a very important strategy, so we had it on its own. And then as kind of sea level rise and climate change affects the coastal area more over time, we want to be able to facilitate relocation away from the hazard zones inland to those areas that we have focused development and investment in. We don't want to lose populations to other communities outside of Hampton. We want to make sure that we're able to accommodate people relocating within town. To make all of this happen, we have to strengthen administrative capabilities, making sure that Hampton has the ability to implement these resiliency actions and also to deal with the increasing strain on municipal capacities that will come with more frequent storms, higher sea levels, and so on. I'm gonna take a drink for a second. And then other important strategies, supporting local business resiliency, local businesses coming back after storms or disruptions has proven to be essential to bring the rest of the community and the rest of the neighborhood that they're based in back after a disruption. So a specific strategy based on that. Preserving and enhancing coastal habitats, which are important to Hampton's economy, important to Hampton's attractiveness to residents and visitors, and also they provide in of themselves resiliency and hazard mitigation benefits. And they also have their own value in of themselves. Promoting social equity, again, socially marginalized communities tend to be most impacted by coastal hazards. And so we want to make sure that we protect those communities. Additionally, we don't want to leave those communities behind with all of these other actions that we're recommending. An important example might be facilitating relocation. We don't want that to impact marginalized communities more than others. So thinking about social equity kind of across all of these. Similarly, elevating awareness, making sure that everyone knows about what's going on and understands why Hampton is making these decisions and what the risks are and how they can protect themselves. And then kind of tying back into the vision priority of state and regional capacities, leveraging these different state and regional institutions that operate in Hampton, and also Hampton's unique position and ability to kind of drive regional resiliency actions. Okay, so that's the overall view, the kind of big picture view. There are a lot of different recommendations. I don't think it's going to be a worthwhile use of our time to go through all of these right now. So I'll try to kind of, I'll leave these up for a minute so people can read through, and I'll pick out a few of them. So for focusing development and investment in low risk areas, densifying certain inland areas. We don't suggest specific areas, maybe the town center, which already has a higher density than other areas, but that would be something that Hampton would have to think about. Incentivizing development inland. So, changing zoning to allow for and encourage density in inland areas, also encouraging with tax credits and other incentives, and using a tool called transfer development rights to encourage development in inland areas, also putting capital investment into inland areas, and then connecting inland to the coast. Again, similar to that portion of the vision, making sure people love the coast. There's a reason they live there. And if we want people to live inland away from the coast and away from hazard areas, we have to make sure that they can still access the coast. So that's what this connecting inland to the coast is about. And then, there's some other recommendations here that similarly are thinking about how to incentivize densification in inland areas and development in inland areas. I don't necessarily mean densification. Some areas would be densified, other areas would just, focusing development there. The second one, protecting resilient hubs and connectors. So the hubs are areas that provide essential services. They might include critical facilities or non-critical facilities, but maybe businesses that are able to provide important services to the community, or even just areas where people could congregate if there were a flood that occurred and people needed to evacuate. Maybe there's a relatively elevated area where people could congregate before being evacuated. And then the connectors are the roads that connect those, and also can be thought of as the different utilities that serve the resilient hubs and critical facilities. So we want to focus protective measures on those resilient connectors and resilient hubs. That might mean elevating buildings, elevating roads. It might mean using harder protection structures on a limited basis, but also we encourage living shorelines whenever possible. These are kind of greener, softer approaches that have less of a negative impact on the local habitats and ecosystems, and also have less of a negative impact on adjacent areas. If you build a seawall in one area, it might protect that area, but it's going to cause erosion on a nearby area typically. So thinking about, minimizing the hard structures and using living shorelines. And then there's a few specific examples. We're trying to make sure that we're really integrating across different planning documents for Hampton. So some of these more specific examples come from the hazard mitigation plan, for example, or some of the recent flood studies that were done in Hampton Harbor and Meadow Pond. So that's where some of these more specific recommendations come from. Living with the water, this one has a lot of recommendations because living with the water is complicated. I think a couple of key ones, instituting a coastal hazard overlay zone that would allow Hampton to institute some higher standards to protect against future flood impacts in areas that are projected to be impacted by future flooding. So right now, Hampton enforces flood mitigation regulations in areas mapped by FEMA as being within the flood zone and also within wetlands. Those typically overlap. But this could allow it to think about what will future flooding be like and kind of preemptively regulate against future hazards that that could cause. Another important one is the substantial improvement definition within Hampton's regulations, which currently, if you do a project, an improvement to a property that costs more than 50% of the value of the property, then you're required to bring that property into compliance with the latest regulations. Right now, that's on a case-by-case basis, so any project you do is counted on its own. This makes it very difficult to bring out of compliance properties into compliance. So redefining substantial improvement as being cumulative over multiple years can bring more buildings into, require more buildings to be flood proofed and protected against flood hazards. And there's a variety of other ones here. I don't know if I'll go through all of them, but some of them that address cultural resources and historic resources, thinking specifically about repetitive loss properties that have been impacted by flooding multiple times, and how to protect them and educate the property owners about how they can protect themselves. And then again, some specific actions that come from other plans. And then this last one, preferred risk NFIP policies. People often think that if they aren't in a flood zone, they don't qualify for flood insurance, but that's not true. In fact, everyone can get flood insurance. And if you're outside of a FEMA mapped high flood risk zone, you can get the preferred risk policy, which is less expensive, but still protects you. And I don't have the number off the top of my head, but something like 50% of damages, maybe I shouldn't say that, a large percentage of damages from flooding happen to properties that are not in mapped FEMA zones. And many of you may have experienced that. So, making sure that people are aware of that and able to protect themselves using these policies. Drainage systems is its own strategy, again, because it's essential to any long-term flood mitigation efforts. So we have a series of recommendations about that. Thinking about using green infrastructure, reducing impervious surfaces and having more pervious surfaces that water is able to trickle down and be absorbed by the land. And also making sure that there is funding for these kinds of retrofits. An important aspect of future planning around drainage is to consider the impacts of both rising sea levels and how rising sea levels will impact the ability of water to flow out of an area and into the sea, and also the impacts of higher precipitation amounts that are expected. So more rain and also higher sea levels present a challenge. Facilitating relocation. I'm going to try to go quicker now because I'm spending too long. Facilitating relocation, I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but it is going to be necessary for people who are in some risk areas over time. Not to be forced to move, but people aren't going to want to live in their area anymore. And so it's important for Hampton to be prepared to help people who want to move away from a property that's being regularly flooded, help them do that, because it can be hard to get rid of a property that is regularly flooded. So making sure that Hampton is prepared to do that, and also incentivizing moving away from risk zones ahead of time. I think an important aspect of this idea of facilitating relocation also is that we're not necessarily talking about helping a specific person move away from their house, but also over time, facilitating kind of a realignment of where people decide they want to live, to encourage people to live outside of flood zones. This is kind of the other side of the first action to facilitate or to incentivize development in low risk areas. We also want to, over time, discourage development in risk areas. Strengthening administrative capacities to make all of this run. An important aspect of that is the idea of having a community resilience administrator, paid position in Hampton staff to help facilitate all of these different actions, including efforts that, for example, joining the community rating system that Hampton already does these things, but it's just hard to get a lot of these things done. And so having additional capacity for that. And there are a number of other actions here, including things related to emergency planning and emergency response. Supporting local business resiliency includes educating business owners, but also having an economic development plan that specifically considers resilience and the economic impacts of climate change. Again, incentivizing businesses to build resilience. Permitting flexibility, thinking about ways that if a business is impacted by a flood and can't operate out of their usual location, there might be ways that the town can help facilitate some alternative type of operation. This action is inspired by a lot of the kind of outdoor dining permit expeditions that happened during COVID-19, where people weren't able to operate out of their normal buildings. So thinking about how we can do that in the context of coastal hazards. Preserve and enhance coastal habitats, thinking both about existing coastal habitats and the services they provide, and also as sea levels rise, how that will change coastal habitats and enabling the inland migration of coastal marshes where possible. So that includes both thinking about open spaces that are adjacent to existing tidal wetlands that can be kept open as open space so that tidal wetland can migrate onto it. And also thinking about barriers that exist, such as undersized culverts, dams, seawalls that are preventing marshes from accessing the full extent that they could potentially access now and in the future. Promoting social equity, an important part of building social capacity against coastal hazards is to strengthen the coastal services, the social services that exist now, and preparing them for disasters. So there's a lot of recommendations here that focus on supporting community organizations, engaging them in coastal resilience, educating them about coastal resilience so that they can then serve the populations that they serve. We also have on here engaging youth. We had a great focus group with the Sustainability Committee at Winnacunnet High, and we want to make sure that they and other youth continue to be engaged and build for the future that they'll be an important part of. Elevating awareness, both in terms of public outreach and engagement, and educating property owners. And I'm doing this out of order a little bit, but also flood hazard disclosure is important. Making sure that when people buy a property or rent a property, they are aware of the flooding risks of that property. So flood hazard disclosure is not required by state law. So we have some recommendations for ways that Hampton can try to increase awareness and education of new property buyers without this being required by state law. And then the last one, leveraging regional and state capacities. So part of this is thinking about Hampton's plans and also regional and state plans and making sure that they are consistent. I'll say that we tried to do a lot of that for this document and looking at state and regional plans and making sure that they're all consistent. And a lot of the actions that you see here came from state and regional plans or are supported by those. Continuing the partnerships that Hampton has with these different regional coastal organizations. And then again, hosting regional resiliency events, as I mentioned earlier. An example is the recent HBAC symposium that really brought people from across the region. So that was a lot. I apologize. I'm gonna go back once more to that first slide. Sorry for that. And so we can see, people can look at all these at once. Victoria will post or launch a poll what is this? Zoom only allows us to have 10 questions per poll, and there's 11 actions. So there's going to be 2 polls. The first is on the first 5. The second is on the second 6. And while people are taking that and thinking about that, if anybody wants to turn their camera on, raise their hand, write in the chat, we'll be happy to have a discussion. Also, let me know in the chat or by unmuting yourself if you want to if you want me to go back to any specific slides so that you can look in more detail at the set of actions. And I'm going to make sure that my permissions are right so that people are able to. Yeah, okay. Okay, Peter. I'm clicking to ask you to unmute, so hopefully that'll work. Peter, are you talking? Sorry, Peter, you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. If you want to try just typing in the chat, you can do that. Anybody else have a, oh, Peter, you're unmuted again, but I still can't hear you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
We've got one in the chat, Noah.
Oh. Okay, yeah, I'll read that. Along with these strategies, what are Hampton's plans to reduce greenhouse gas, fossil fuel use, etc.? Oh, well, you didn't say etc. i.e. electric town vehicles, etc. That's a great question, right? So in the resilience chapter, we don't address these what I would call sustainability questions, although they are connected, and I think that that will have to be addressed in maybe in other chapters of the master plan. But it's a good question and something to think about. And I don't know, Jason, maybe we can talk offline afterwards about whether we want to try to mention something about that in here.
Would you like me to switch over the poll, Noah?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
I see Anne. Did you want to say something? Oh, it looks like you don't have any audio set up. Man, there's a lot of audio problems tonight. Sorry, Anne, I think you have to connect to audio, which there might be like a headphones in the bottom left of your screen. I also see Bob's screen changed. I'll ask you to unmute. Did you want to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm listening to the whole thing here, and I think of having a lot of contradictory goals in this whole thing. You really have to realize that Hampton is a limited geographical area when you start talking about relocation and further development within the town. and you're talking about preserving open spaces and things all in the same breath. And you can't have everything. You can't move part of the town to another part of the town and preserve the undeveloped land and the open spaces that are left in a confined geographical area in the town.
Yeah, it's definitely would be it's definitely a tricky situation. But yeah, I hear you. So I mean, that's something to think about a little bit more, maybe. Thanks.
No, if I could just say something really quickly. I think one way to address that comment is to maybe say right up front in the vision and in the coastal chapter that some of the objectives and goals do seem to be not, I don't want to use the word contradictory, but not consistent with one another and will be difficult to implement. I think saying it can go a long way to sort of setting up the stage for it to be so that people understand that it is a challenge and it won't work everywhere, but acknowledging it would be really helpful. So I think we can do that.
Thanks. I'm going to try to unmute Peter again. Sorry, Peter, I'm not sure why your audio isn't working.
We had a comment in the chat box, Noah, from a participant who wanted to just agree with Bob on that. So I think, yeah, we'll take a good look at how to make some of that just be owned outright and stated specifically in the documents. There was a new question in the chat box, Noah. I'll let you take a look at that.
Okay, yeah. I also just as we're talking about this, I'm also thinking that, the idea isn't also to move all of Hampton Beach into the town center. It's possibly a little bit more of a subtle or less severe kind of organization of people than that. So that might be, I don't know. Yeah, I'll think about how to clarify that a little bit more. Okay, how is Hampton? Okay, how is Hampton working with Seabrook and the state regarding the impact of rising tides to the Seabrook nuclear power plant and therefore surrounding areas like Hampton? Also a good question. I'll say that we do mention the Seabrook nuclear power plant in the chapter, or at least I think I do, with regards to that last strategy of leveraging regional and state capacities, because it's definitely an important thing to think about, both in terms of impacts to the plant from coastal hazards, but also actually as a kind of asset in terms of the emergency planning that comes along with that plant, to help with things like evacuation in the case of a storm. So I think there is a lot to think about with the nuclear power plant that is relevant to coastal resilience. And the plant itself is heavily regulated by the Federal Nuclear Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in terms of protection from coastal hazards. Okay, and then the other comment here, contradictory goals and the need to prioritize. Some will have higher priority than others, maybe. And that'll be something for us to talk about, and also maybe to be worked out as the rest of the master plan is developed, since that's really going to be addressing the future development goals of the town on a larger scale. So that might, in addition to working on that now, that might also, we might see some of the prioritization coming out of that second phase. In terms of the question about barriers, berms, levees, etc., even knowing that these things may not be permanent, they would allow us to spread costs and tasks out over time. Yeah, so we include some recommendations from the hazard mitigation plan and from the flood studies that mention different areas that are appropriate for these kinds of what I would call hard shoreline protection structures. The challenge with hard shoreline protection structures, there are multiple challenges with hard shoreline protection structures. One is those kind of secondary impacts that they have on surrounding areas and on local habitats. And so every time you put in a hard structure, you kind of end up chasing the structure. You protect one area, but then you have to protect the area next to that area, and so on and so forth. A second, maybe equally important thing is that within these coastal areas, and especially adjacent to wetlands and in wetlands and coastal and beaches and so on, building new structures like this, there already exist a lot of structures in Hampton that can be repaired and maintained over time, but building new ones is very challenging to permit with the state and the federal government because of those impacts that they've seen over time back when they did permit them. So we try to avoid those when possible, and in this plan really try to think about other ways that we can build resilience over the long term. But we do have some of those in here. But good question. Yeah, I'll unmute you. You should be able to unmute yourself. Okay.
Yeah, I guess it's in the category of hard structures. But in the study that was done by the Department of Agriculture 20 years ago, the writer indicated that he thought that you could lower the water surface in Meadow Pond by 1.5 feet by dredging in some areas. Not deep dredging, but dredging that straighten out the flow of the water through there. And again, that might just be a short-term solution, but it would help people immediately while we worked on finding other solutions. That'd be an immediate good. Just something to think about. There may be places that we can use that.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, so in terms of like the specific types of interventions or more specific approaches, we were really relying on other studies that were done, like the most recent Meadow Pond flood study and the Hampton Harbor flood study, as well as some state reports and anyways other sources to get some of these things. And I didn't see much about dredging, which is why it's not in here, but I can look more into whether there's any of that that's recommended from these other reports that have analyzed how effective it would be. I would say I think that I'm hoping the framework of the master plan is that it guides decisions about more specific actions taken later. And so, I think that the framework of this chapter is such that if a future study identifies an action that will be beneficial in terms of flood mitigation and coastal resilience, it fits within the plan and is acceptable to it. So that might be something for me to kind of look back through and see to make sure that, you know, there could be a recommendation that future studies be done to determine resilient actions and those actions be taken or something like that.
I'll send you a copy of that report that was done by this principal engineer at Department of Agriculture National. No, well, in any event, I think you'll find it interesting. And I guess what I lean toward is doing things immediately that we can then grow into a longer range solution rather than coming up with the perfect solution. I mean, this was done 20 years ago. If we had done this 20 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about some of these problems. Sometimes we get lost in our studies when we could start something right now and be prepared for whatever we select in the future. You know, like hardening the creek, for example, so that when we do decide how we're going to get rid of the excess water, the creek's ready to channel all that water, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
No, there's a good reminder in the chat box from Natalie that the Public Works is about to release the public version of the study that will address some of this. So everybody should watch for that soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I also, Anne, who wasn't able to talk, unfortunately, wanted, well, sorry, I can't read and talk at the same time, but I mentioned the Hampton Beach Area Commission Symposium earlier as a very cool event that Hampton did that shows its ability to kind of leverage its regional position. And you can go to the website and watch a replay of the symposium and see how that went. And also a great benefit of that is you can see how all these other organizations and governmental agencies, the different projects that they're working on that are relevant to Hampton and the different plans that they're doing. So I actually just got the link, so I'll share that link with everyone. If you want to go look at the Coastal Resilience Symposium, you can watch it, and I think you also might be able to download some of the presentations or the meeting packet that has links to all these different projects, many of which have informed this plan. So it's a good resource. Thanks, Anne.
And Noah, could I just add one thing on that?
Please.
Yep. So basically, that I believe that if that link is not already on the Town of Hampton's website as well, we'll put it up on the front page so people can get to that symposium information very easily. So I just wanted to make note of that.
Thanks, Jason. And that reminds me, I'm just going to share the project website again here. So if people want to go back to that and check out the report and other updates. Anybody else have a comment or question or thought? Okay.
Oh, Barbara's
Barbara.
asking. Yep.
Yeah, here, ask you to mute. Okay, Barbara, you should be able to unmute yourself now, I think.
Okay.
Great.
This is a tremendous amount of work, and I thank you all for it. I'd like to share some impressions just for you to think about. One is that much of what you described today, while I'm sure it does apply to Hampton, it's not really connected to Hampton. It could be most of it, almost 20 towns. So I think my suggestion is you look for ways to be specific about providing examples of what you're talking about, or where you're talking about, or how we get from here to there. Catherine sort of was looking at that right in the beginning, but I think that really would help a lot. The other comment is obvious. I took a lot of time to read the attachment, and so I'm a little bit at a loss because in the full document, I can relate page by page. Today, I understand the overview, but it's really hard to relate to it if you want specificity. There are a couple things I can suggest, which weren't really talked about. One thing I would suggest, if you find a way to better characterize Hampton Beach and the Route 1 area, and I would suggest the industrial areas in the town, which are kind of hidden, but they are, or the corporate areas, they're very significant. There's a lot more, this is my impression, and so because I can't back it up right now, but it's my impression that it's would be a good idea to take a look at places like Force Manufacturing. The extensive development in small businesses, particularly along Route 1. And you hear where I'm going. If you can kind of quantify some of this into being, we can recognize more specifically. But I do think the business community in general, for whatever it is, might be articulated a little better.
Okay.
Because it's a heavy part of the town. And by the way, the same is true for the Hampton Beach area. While you're describing I'm just going to say the natural state of affairs, there's a tremendous amount of activity that will be affected by many of the suggestions that you have. So the area that goes from the bridge up to High Street is an economic driver. And so I'm just suggesting that somehow, and I'm not saying whether it's vision or this because it overlaps. But that's something I think would be would help a lot to help people get the picture of what you're describing. I have a suggestion on the maps, which there are about 10 or 11 maps that are in a different segment. And I would suggest that you name some of the streets. You do that in one map that's in the text. And you say, here's 101, here's one, here, because one of the things that I became far more aware of, thanks to the work that you're doing, is that we're not talking just about the coastal and the, let's say, Meadow Pond, the areas that are essentially more wetlands. But if I understand your description of the future, we're going to be beyond Route 1, perhaps up to 95. So we need to, we need to recognize that and say, oh yeah, it's a long way away. But it's part of the vision. It's part of the coastal management world, so to speak. So I don't know if that, I can't be very specific because I got 80 pages here, and you're dealing with overviews and rubrics, which I understand in a in a setting like this. I would point out one thing, though. I'm seeing that the description, the census figures that are used in the document, they're really 10 years old, and I think they're old. I think you might want even, you know, I understand the new figures. I don't know if they're out yet, but, and they will be soon. But that's an important thing to evaluate, I would suggest to you, because it really, I think the town's changed quite a lot in the last 10 years in terms of population and
Yeah.
what's in it. So, and I'll ask you one question. I mean, these are just a few overviews. I heard some very good comments from Mr. Fenright. I think he was, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but looking at, I hope it's you. I'm looking at this picture. He's on the right track, and I think it's good to maybe sound it out a little more, because one of the things that hopefully we come away with is where are we going and how do we get there? So I'll leave you with that thought and one question. What is soaking up the rain?
What is soaking up the rain?
Correct.
It's the name of a program that promotes using green infrastructure to absorb rain and have it infiltrate into the soil instead of running over land, I believe.
I thank you for the explanation. I would just say for folks who might be interested, there's a tremendous amount of information, including examples of communities like ours in the work that they do. So I think it would be very helpful to maybe have a link in a way, or, you know, take a look at it. That's my suggestion. Because there are a lot of other communities that have gone through what we're going through and what we will go through. And a lot of them have addressed a good part of it. So I'm hoping that we get some flavor of that. If you can, if you can bring some of that in, and I do think that's what Catherine was getting at.
Thanks, Barbara.
So I'll stop.
Thanks. Good thoughts and questions. All right. Well, with that, it is 8:30. So if people need to leave, then that's understandable. Victoria, there is one more coastal resilience poll. That's just an overview poll that you could post while I just go to the final slide that has some links to show people. So if people want to respond to this poll, you're invited to. In the meantime, I'll just go over the next steps for this project a little bit. So we're pretty close to the end of this first phase. So we hope to take any feedback that the feedback that we got from you tonight, and any other feedback that we get from you in the next week or so to create an updated version of this document, both documents of the coastal resilience chapter and the vision, and those will be submitted to the master plan steering committee. I believe the plan is March 24th, Jason, for any kind of final, here are the last changes to make before we end this project on the 31st, at which point phase 2 starts and picks it up and moves it forward for the rest of the master plan.
Yeah, I believe, Noah, that we were scheduling a special acceptance meeting with the steering committee. I thought it was the 24th that we were going to do that. I believe we do have our steering committee meeting next Wednesday evening as well. Our regular steering committee meeting where this will be discussed again. And there is a public comment portion, just so people know, at the beginning of the steering committee. meeting on the 17th. So if people want to share their comments at that point in time, I would certainly encourage you to call in. It's an audio teleconference, and that meeting agenda will be posted sometime tomorrow morning, I believe. So just so people know that.
And I'll encourage you to send your, to go to the project website, tinyurl.com/planhampton, if you haven't already, to read through the draft documents. We have an online survey that it's actually not even really a survey. It's a feedback form using this Survey Monkey software, which you can access through the project website. That breaks the plan, the documents down into different sections where you can write us your thoughts about them. Or you are also invited to send me an email. I'll post my email again. And if you can send those to me in the next week-ish, that would be good. Let me just look at my calendar to give you a more specific date. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble navigating all the different things on my screen right now. So by next Friday, the 19th, is when we'll be closing the survey, and when I'll be hoping that you have sent responses to me by then, as that will give me time to incorporate them into the plan. So March 19th, a week from tomorrow. But of course, if you don't manage to get to it by then, you are still encouraged to participate in the next phase of the plan. And the plan isn't adopted until the end of the whole master plan is adopted. So there will still be opportunities for you to participate later on. And I'm sending my email again. All right, well, thank you everybody for coming. And hope to hear from you with your thoughts soon, and see you at other master plan events.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone. Good night.